Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Chrono here, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about a new augment that got added in with the most recent patch. That would be Grand Dread, and the effects that it has had on the augmenting meta, at least on the super high end. Now, quick disclaimer for you guys. What we're going to be going over is a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of theoretics. This isn't exact real world science, meaning that your results may vary if you go out and test these things. A lot of things are not accounted for. Things like the enemy that you're fighting against does change. Those values do differ. Defensive values change. It causes different weapons to become more powerful under certain circumstances. So keep all of that in mind. The whole idea here is to just compare two things as close as we possibly can to get an idea of what is happening. So keep in mind, this isn't going to be an exact, if you do this, you get 5 more damage than this, giving you 10 more damage, so on and so forth. That's not what it is here. So grain of salt aside, now you guys have gotten my disclaimer. I can actually go into the rest of my intro. If you're new here, I'm Chrono. I can recover PSO2 content. Would much appreciate to subscribe as we work our way towards that 10K mark, hopefully by the end of this year. It's been fluctuating back and forth pretty hard recently. I know PSO2 is kind of like not doing the hottest, so the things that we plan on doing, or we planned on doing on the channel anyway. So you guys might see a little bit of a shift. Hopefully you guys will come along for that ride. Either way, let's go ahead and jump into this. So when we're pulling up Cakewalk's damage calculator, actually I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up on the screen now. We're doing this in Cakewalk's damage calculator. Huge shout out to Cakewalk for always updating this and making sure that we're aware, and of course answering back any questions we might have. Awesome individual. You guys should definitely check them out. So what we're going to be doing is we're going through Cakewalk's damage calc. For those of you guys who've never used or never seen me use this before on the channel, I have an entire video dedicated to showing how it works in case it's something that you want to test on your own. Maybe you disagree with what I'm doing and think, oh, well, it's got to be something else. You just didn't do it right here. I want to do it instead. By all means, I actually encourage you guys to go out there and try this on your own. That way, it's not just me telling you something. You have figured it out for yourselves as well. So what you're going to see here, again, I'm going to go through this very quickly, is just simply critical rate up plus 15, which this is for Slayer enabled stuff. You've got offensive damage bonuses like Shifta main class, Shifta D-band, Blight, food, defensive stats, things like that. Add-on skills, which all of ours are maxed anyway, so we leave those at 20. If you wanted to calculate, say you didn't have add-on skills, you could of course disable add-on skills. It does fluctuate and change how your damage works, so it is worth mentioning, especially since there's crit damage and crit chance, so on and so forth. And then of course you have your weapon, your armor that you're using, and all of the augments and the calculations of all of those together. You have a theoretic effective amount of damage. You also have your class choice in combination, the enemy you're fighting, because that does make a difference. Fighting a level 80 enemy and then fighting a level 80 Gigantics is different because of the defensive values. So make sure that if you're doing a comparison like this, I personally like to put mine at 80, so equal to what I'm fighting. It just feels the most fair. However, it's possible that maybe you're consistently fighting smaller enemies. Maybe you're doing a calculation for the best enemy or the best weapon to use against like farming or something like that, and the enemies are 5 levels below you. I would swap it over because it does make and change some things up. There's also a weapon list. You can choose what weapons are actually filtered on the table for you. We have our set to a very few number of weapons. Realistically, I could have it set to even less, but this is fine for the video that we'll be doing. Now, what we're going to be comparing essentially is 3 different setups. The first one's going to be what I personally use, or the closest to what I personally use right now, which is my Verschmelz Term 2 setup. Now, that setup is very, I don't say very expensive, but like, I feel like if you're pushing for best in slot and you're not a Slayer, this is about what you're going for, basically. It is expensive, yes, but this is kind of like your overall goal. You may not ever reach that goal by the time something new comes out, but it's pretty easy to work your way towards it. At the very least, swapping things like LCs for Gladia, Hal Finale, Gigas Mass Day, not a big deal. High Domina can quite literally just be a stat, doesn't have to be High Domina. And I think my armor actually is a stat, it just doesn't make a difference for this here. And then of course Capsule and Grippable aren't too bad. It's just when you pick them up is up to you. So as far as damage goes, this is kind of like the best setup that you can get right now, at least if you're not a Slayer, assuming that you don't have a Atisa, which we're going to get to that as well. That's kind of where the big change comes in. So you can see Bow-Fi, skill effects, all that good stuff. Funny enough, I believe I'm looking at this right. Let's see. Yeah, if an enemy is downed, it makes a pretty big amount of difference, especially when you're calculating things like phi. So we're not going to mess too much with that. So either way, you can see our theoretic damage right now is 40-44. It's what we've got. Not too bad. Term 2 I know seems kind of crazy, but realistically speaking, if you're doing your best to try to farm out LCE, you're going to eventually get to your reverse term 2. So that's not too bad. I know it's a 10% chance. I know it's 300 each time, but if you're trying to, push your power up, just keep on farming, guys. It's worth it. All right, so that's going to be our current setup. Let me switch us over to our setup that we're going to take a look at for Slayer and show you guys what a Neos A is capable of. All right, and as you can see, by simply switching over to a term 2 Neos Astrian instead, we haven't even, put Grand Dread on. You can see our effective damage has already jumped up to 4307. Kind of the strength of having so much crit built into your base kit as a Slayer that you end up getting some massive bonuses. Now, the reason again I chose Slayer is because that's the only time you're going to be ignoring a Verschmelz. Every other class, granted, you can use Slayer as a subclass and you do get some crit chance, yes, but it's not nearly as much as Slayer is actually getting, and that's where the main difference actually comes in. So even before we add in Grand Dread, you can see that it's a massive, bump. But if we were to say take this and we go Grand Dread, so let's go ahead and grab Grand Dread, you can start to see that even though it's a little bit less potency, because of that potency floor, the average amount of damage does increase. Our effective damage goes up to 4377.50. Now, if you were someone who, let's say, speedrunning, and you were just going for the perfect crit RNG, technically this would be a effective damage loss on a lucky run, because you are using less potency. When you're going for max, damage as possible, you go for the max amount of potency you can get without losing, or you get as much potency floor as you can get without losing any potency whatsoever. You want max potency plus that potency floor. But this is an acceptable loss here in this situation for 99.9% of people. Even speedrunners honestly would rather, in most cases, take the consistency here. But that's a Neos Astrian term 2. Realistically, people are building these up higher than Terminid 2. They're pushing, guys, we can take a look at Fatal real quick, and as you can see, Fatal is not going to be better. It's a little worse because you don't need that much more crit chance when you have so much of it already. But if you look at term 5 is killing it. It's not, insanely further ahead, but it is further ahead. Term 3 is usually where I would push and kind of sit and not mess with anything. This is like a comfortable spot to be in. But term 2 is not bad. Term 2 is, is acceptable as far as I'm concerned when you're looking at the damage amounts. But term 3, definitely good. You can see term 3 is 9% crit damage. Term 2 is 9% crit damage. Term 3 is 12. And look at something like term 4. Term 4 only goes up to 14. You only go up 2%, and then term 5 I think goes up another 2%, 1% I think, 1%, yeah. So it's a little bit of DR, a little bit of diminishing returns, but as you can see, it does increase the overall damage. Now, what if you're going for something like Atisa? Well, that's where things change up. Now, I'm gonna actually not even cut this one. You guys can kind of see it in real time. So let's say no Fixa. Let's say Tissa with 4%, I believe. Yeah, 4% Tissa. I feel like that's a reasonable amount to have here. Now you can see the drastic jump in damage. Now, granted, this is of a Slayer, so this is with the extra crit chance. But let's go back, right? Let's take a look at what it would be like if we were playing Bouncer. So we swap us back to Bouncer. And as you can see, it's still a pretty sizable jump. We're still over where we started, which of course you'd want to be, right? It's a Tissa versus a Verschmelz. But Verschmelz is kind of like the choice outside of Tissa. You can kind of see where this is actually at. So this is 41-45. Even if we were to say, let's go back to Speed Trip. Let's say we just got a Verschmelz or we got a Tissa. How strong is that really versus the Verschmelz we would have, right? So you can actually see that a Tissa is not really that good for us here. Well, but we're sub fighter. What if we go sub Slayer? All of a sudden it jumps up. Crit chance really makes a huge difference. That's why when you're dealing with augments like Grand Dread, where we're talking about potency floor, the fluctuation just kind of goes all over the place. So let's go back and put Grand Dread here again. So let's pop this back in, right? And we pop Grand Dread back in and bam. We're now sitting in a comfortable 42-49 with Atisa 4%. We're also sub Slayer or Bouncer Slayer. The biggest thing here though, oh, this is also, oh no, this is no fix. Okay, we're good. Biggest thing here that you've got to keep in mind is that this is also only with sub Slayer. When you lose that Slayer sub, let's say we go Fighter, you lose a good chunk of damage. You lose a good chunk of effective damage you have access to. Is it the end of the world? No, not really. It's just, it's 100 effective damage. Are you going to see massive damage number differences? No, but you will see damage number differences if you're someone who pays attention to your damage. I'm not even going to go into fixes on the Atisa, like that's insane. But this, all what this video basically here is here to show you guys is that, is Grand Dreadkeeper powerful? Yes, if used correctly. However, it is not going to drastically just change the formula and make you want to drop your Verschmelz. So if we were to say take this setup and I don't know, drop it on a, let's see a Neos A, let's see how much of a difference that would make. Let's see a Neos A with term 3, which I said was like kind of effectively, you know, good enough, right? Term 3 Neos A. This is a term 3 Neos A sub Slayer, and as you can see, the damage is a bit lower. Well, you know, let's give it benefit of the doubt, right? Benefit of the doubt, term 3 Neos A. What if we went Fixa Fatale 3? Fatale 3 ends up being better. So if you really want to get a damage bump over your reverse term 2 that is not using Dreadkeeper or Grand Dread, and you want to put it on all of your gear, you can get about roughly an effective 11 points of damage when it comes down to a calculation. And that's on a Fatale 3 Neos A with Grand Dreadkeeper. That's if you want to put a Grand Dread on a Neos A. Are there other setups you can use? Absolutely. But what this basically is here to show you is that Versh is still definitely your play. It's going to be your play for a long time. This basically was a buff to Slayers. Slayers technically were kind of, I don't want to say falling behind, because falling behind isn't really the right term to use in this situation, but Slayers didn't have access to using Verschmelz, and they had a stronger choice even than us with a Neos Astrium because of how much crit chance that class has. Is to show that potency floor versus crit chance, they are both important, but it depends on your class. It depends on how much you have of each of these things, how it's really going to work out. So I'm probably going to put a timestamp to this moment in the video, so that way anyone who wants just the answer to the entire process, what is the finalized result? Like, what does this mean? So Grand Dread, if you are a Slayer, if you're someone who has a very, very beefed up Neos Astrian already, and you just want to basically gouge your battle power as much as possible, then as long as you at least have a Neos Astrian Fatale 3, you are locked in to the Slayer subclass, and you are fully augmented out, then yes, you will get a damage bump over your Verschmelz Termina 2. If not Termina 1. If it's Termina 1, of course, yes. But this is over your Verschmelz Termina 2, and by about 10 effective damage, 11 effective damage roughly, which again, these are rough calculations. They're not exacts. Keep that in mind. You're not going to see a massive jump of hitting crits of like 100k to 120k, 130k. Though the smaller numbers do matter in PSO2, you have to also keep that in mind because things are all multiplicative and, you know, things ramp up pretty crazily. You're not going to see a massive damage jump between those two. If you're comfortable with your Versh, stick with your Versh. If you are a Slayer, then this is a damage increase for you. This is part of your best in slot setup. You want Gladiusol, you want Hal Finale, you want Gigas Maste, you want Grand Dreadkeeper, XT Speedmail Raw, and then you also want High El Domina. I mean, I think you actually might also, you know, hold on, there's one thing I want to test real quick. Yeah, it dawned on me as I was going through that actual comparison really quick here, because I did definitely forget about the XD. You actually also want XD deft mel raw. So keep in mind, you also want to make sure you have this slotted in. That's going to give the other options a bit more of a bump. So let's say, for example, you are back on, I don't know, bow, slayer sub. You definitely want to give yourself that XD deft instead of the XD speed. It is going to give you a bit more of a bump overall. So we can look at it from, let's see, it's term, or what's Fatale was what we're looking at. Fatale 3, which is, I guess, the more so. So yeah, you're looking at roughly so that's 41.13 versus the term 2, which was 40.44. So yeah, it's going to be a damage bump, but keep that in mind if you have been using, you know, the speed mel instead of the deft mel. Maybe you left your deft on here, because some people I know did leave their deft capsule on here, or on their units. We have this swapped over completely. I was missing a bit of potency flare, which is an unfair comparison. But overall, you're looking at less than 100 extra effective damage. And that's for Grand Dreadkeeper. That's for adding XD deft mel. That's for building up a Neos Astrian, which you can't just buy off the market. You have to build it up, or you have to get lucky to get one as a drop. And it needs to be Fatale. That's going to be the crux of it itself. It will be a damage bump, yes, but it won't be a massive damage bump overall. Verse is still going to be very powerful. It's going to be very easy for you to use. You have the option of using multiple different subclasses. So if, let's say, for example, you're someone who's doing Lucille Exploration, it's a normal attack day, you want to take Sub Ranger, that way the boss does not, you know, aggro onto you and you can be away from them while you're doing your normal attacks that do insane amounts of damage and do tons and tons of damage and not build up tons of threat. Well, you can take Sub Slayer or Sub Ranger without having to worry about it, because you have all the crit that you need. It gives you that flexibility of a subclass choice overall, when you really need to run Slayer if you're going to run anything that's not 100% crit, because you just want that extra crit. You can play around with other weapons, like, you know, lower potency weapons, or not lower potency, lower star weapons, but that's totally fine. So for Slayers, for Atisa users, Grand Dread is all you. For everyone else, Verschmelz is perfectly fine. If in the future they decide to go ahead and move away from the 100% crit chance, which I believe that's going to happen, whether they go with a completely different potential, whether they go with a completely different, or they go with an upgrade like I thought, or I would want them to, that's when Grand Dread is going to basically blanket everything. It is an upgrade everywhere, until we really hit 100% crit easily. Anyway, guys, it's a lot of information. It was a little bit all over the place at the end there. Apologies. There was something that I'd forgotten. I wanted to go ahead and mix in here, but that should be your overall answer. Grand Dread's not bad, but it does not kill Verse. So anyone who's told you that, they have not actually looked at the data. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end. If you have any questions, feel free to toss it in the comments below. If I missed anything, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to take a look at it. But I'm pretty sure this covers basically everything you need to know about when it comes down to dealing with this setup. Also, yes, it is worth mentioning that it does bring your potency floor up to 74%, which is 1% shy of that magical 75 that we used to have with our lower rarity weapons. Leave you with that little nugget. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Take care, everyone. Peace out.